You guys hear me? My microphone isn't. You guys hear me? Okay, just like it. Yeah, I'll do that. I'm gonna get a whiteboard quick. That was pretty good. Sorry, the annoying sound. All right, so with regards to the test, I'm asking you to find the period, the amplitude, and the vertical shift, right? So amplitude, whether it's sine or cosine, is just that number, the absolute value of that number. So if it's negative, you'd make it positive, but since it's positive, the amplitude is 4. Pretty easy, right? Let's do the period next. So for the period, we're going to take, this is kind of an ugly problem, but so we look at the value here, right? That W value, and it's 2 pi divided by that number, right? You see, I'm trying to see myself here, right? So it'd be 2 pi divided by 5. So you just ask yourself, can you simplify that? And you cannot. So that is the period. The midline equation, I believe, right? The midline equation is just y equals whatever you're adding or subtracting to the function, right? So I'm trying to make sure my hand's out of my way here. Whatever you're adding or subtracting to the function. I'm not adding or subtracting anything here, so the midline equation is y equals 0. That's what you have to do on that quiz, is those 3 calculations. So it's the same for sine and cosine. If I can link if I can link some more examples too. Give me a sec. There's some air here. So good question. Why is it always 2 pi? Because it's always 2 pi every single time. The reason is because 2 pi is equivalent to 360 degrees. And so a typical period would do one, it's gonna last 2 pi radians. You can think of it as time. Like a normal Ferris wheel will go around in 2 pi radians. By putting a 5 in front of it, you're making that period a lot quicker. So you're dividing the 2 pi by 5, but it's always based off of the 2 pi. And it's always the absolute value. So if this was a negative here, if this would have been a negative here, I can write away. I would have divided by the positive value. So it's always 2 pi divided by the absolute value of that coefficient inside. This YouTube video, I kind of went through it, I linked it there, has a, towards the end of the video, there are more examples for it. I believe that on that quiz, like this is what was going to be our quiz that we were going to take before we went on this break, right? It's the same quiz we were going to take anyways. I'm asking you just to find the amplitude, the period, and the equation of the midline. So those are the 3 answers to that. All right, does that help at all? Hopefully. All right. Okay, why is it y equals 0? So for the equation of the midline, I'm going to write it like this way so I have more space. So this is what the equation you gave me was, right? It's just, I'm adding nothing. There's a plus 0 there, right? So that's why the midline equation is y equals 0. It's whatever, it's y equals this number is the midline equation. So if it would have been a plus 4, it would have been y equals 4. If it would have been a minus 3, it would have been y equals minus 3, right? And I believe on the quiz, like if I were to write it something like this, right? Right, so it's kind of a similar form as this one here, but I put that minus 3 in front, right? Yeah, so y is always equal to k. So just sometimes, I think on the quiz, that constant, think of k for constant in a way, I know it starts with a k, it's this value here. It can be in the point is it can be in the front as well, but it's what's being added to the equation outside of the parentheses, right? In class, we talked about the horizontal shift. That was when it was inside the parentheses. For this quiz, you can ignore that value. In other words, if the plus 3, just one more point here. If I would have wrote it like this, this could be a little tricky. So if I were to write it with the plus 3 in the parentheses, the equation for the midline would have still been y equals 0. Okay, so it's like what's added outside of the parentheses is what's giving you that answer. That's really what I wanted to get Algebra 2 get done this week, was eventually that quiz that I put up there. Let me write back. Maybe if you have another question, just type it in. How you doing, buddy? Want to say hi to people on the internet? I'll say hi to Autumn. Glad to help you, Autumn, my son. Have a good day. You had a question for CT? Yep. It's the same for sine and cosine, Noah, so I'll just pick one of those. Hopefully not laying it too bad. Here's an example. So I'll just go all three of the calculations you needed for the quiz, right? So first of all, the amplitude, that's the easy one. That's the coefficient here, right? Just the number in front. Whatever that is, take the absolute value of it, that's that answer. Pretty easy, right? The period. So the period, you base everything off of 2 pi. So I take 2 pi, because that's a typical period of a sine and cosine function. So many radians it is around the unit circle. And I divide that by the coefficient of the variable inside the parentheses, right? So whatever the coefficient inside the parentheses is, I divide 2 pi by that. I also take the absolute values. If it happened to be negative, I would change it to a positive to divide. Like these two answers should always be positive. So I'll divide by 3. And that is the period. You can't simplify that at all, right? It's 2/3. You can't divide, if it would have been 2/4, you could have simplified it to 2, like 1/2, but that is the period. And then the midline equation, I know on the quiz this is a little bit tricky, so if you want to if you want to check your work, you can resubmit it if you want. It's always, no space here. I'll just erase this. It's always y equals, I'll do a fraction in a second. Y equals, and it's whatever this number that you're adding or subtracting outside of the parentheses, right? So it's outside of the parentheses. What are you adding or subtracting? This is in case it's -2. So it's -2. Now, that -2, I could have also written this equation like this, where that -2 was brought out in front, right? It's the same thing as the one above. So you're looking for the midline. What are you adding or subtracting outside of the parentheses? And it's just y equals whatever number that is. Okay. Now your question is, what if it's a fraction? Okay, so let's, yeah. So if I have y equals sine of, let's say, 2/3 theta minus 2 plus 4. Okay, and I'll go through all the three of them. If you're any algebra 2 students out here, all three of them that you got to know for that quiz I want you to take by the end of the week, right? First is the amplitude. Amplitude is just the coefficient. There's nothing in front, so there's a 1 because it's 1 times. So its amplitude is 1. All right, the period now, yeah, this will take a little bit of work to do. Okay, so if you just, it's dividing them. So it's 2 pi divided by 2/3. So that's a little messy. So to kind of simplify it, you just got to go through your fraction arithmetic stuff. So I'm going to write this division problem a little bit different. I'm going to write it as 2 pi divided by 2/3. You see that without the glare? So I just wrote it because I can do the fraction arithmetic now like you did in middle school, right? I will put 2 pi over 1 and I'll flip the second fraction and multiply. So I'll change it to 2 pi over 1 times 3 over 2. Right? And then just like, when you're working with pi, you just kind of, like you do with the first part of the review or the quiz where you're evaluating different radians at different angles, right? You sometimes have to subtract 2 pi. You just kind of keep the pi just kind of comes along, right? You just kind of bring it along with the work. But really, I'm just doing 2 over 1 times 3 over 2. Those 2's cancel, right? I'm just left with, well, pi times 3 or 3 pi, and then 1 times 1 is 1. So just the period there will be 3 pi. So when you have a fraction, it's 2 pi divided by that fraction, but to do like the math, it's really, you're gonna end up multiplying. You're end up gonna be doing 2 pi times the reciprocal of the fraction when it comes down to the arithmetic. And you just keep the pi along as your period. And then here, to finish it off, the midline equation, I have a +4, right? I have a +4, so it's y equals 4. So your three answers there would be 1, 3 pi for the period, and y equals 4 for the midline equation. Again, if I look at the YouTube channel here, I put the linked video is some work I did on that. There's some more examples. For that as well. Glad to hear it. Stay healthy. as you can see, in quarantine, my beard is getting ridiculous. So I'll get to figure that out. So you guys know I'm sending an email to all students for the even block days today, so just letting you guys know. What did I for? Nope, wrong class. Oh, here. I should have made this. I hate myself sometimes. Out of 4. You guys, any questions? Feel free to ask. I'm here for another. We got here 10 minutes or so. Yeah, Bobby, I'll do one right now. Give me a sec. I got a whiteboard. Oh, it's right here. So it's the same for sine and cosine. All right. So no matter what. Sorry, let me mute this. I hear myself talking. So it's the same for sine and cosine. So no matter what function you have, the process is the same. So let's make something up here. I know on the quiz, they use like this theta variable. There's an example. All right, so I have y equals 3 sine of 2/3 theta plus 7 minus 4. So the three things you got to be able to calculate on this quiz are the amplitude, the period, and the equation for the midline. Let's do the easiest one first, the amplitude. We use capital A. So for the amplitude, you just look at what's being multiplied to the sine function or cosine function. So it's what's numbers in front here. So, and I take the absolute value of it. So if it's positive, it's positive. If it's negative, it becomes positive. And I just write that number down. So the amplitude of this function is 3. In other words, like those peaks and valleys will be going 3 times higher and 3 times lower. All right, so that's how you do that first one. That's pretty simple. The next one we'll do is period. So period, we base a period off of a normal rotation, which is 2 pi radians, like 360 degrees. We kind of base everything off of that. So I take 2 pi and I divide it by the number that's being multiplied inside parentheses. So by 2/3, I'm going to take 2 pi and divide it by what's being multiplied inside the parentheses, 2/3. So and again, it's the absolute value. The amplitude and periods should never be negative. So you're always going to be working with pi. So even if this was a negative here, you change to a positive. All right, so we got to simplify this fraction a little bit. So because it's a little bit messy, all this is saying is 2 pi divided by 2/3. So I'm going to rewrite that as 2 pi, a little bit neater, 2 pi divided by 2/3, right? So I'm just going to evaluate to simplify it. So I know when I divide fractions, I just change it to multiplication and I flip the second one. So I'm going to change this to times 3/2. And I'm going to put that 2 pi over 1. So it's kind of very similar to what you did in the first part of the quiz where you have to sometimes subtract 2 pi to get the angle to appear on the circle. The way you do this math, as you know, is the pi just kind of comes along with the answer, right? You just kind of carry the pi through. Really what I'm doing is 2 times 3/2. And so you can cross off the 2's, right? Because those cancel. And on the top, I'm just left with 1 times 3, which that will be 3. And then pi just comes along, right? And then I'll have 1 times 1 on the bottom. So in other words, the period is 3 pi. So a couple things about this process is it's always 2 pi divided by this number inside the parentheses that's multiplied to the variable, right? You don't use this one at all. This adding part here, you don't use. It's what's being multiplied. All right, so we got the amplitude of 3, the period here to be 3 pi, right? The period's the toughest one. So if you get that, it's pretty easy. And then the last one is the equation for the midline. So it always has the form y equals some number. And this is where you're shifting the graph up and down, right? So you're basically seeing how far are you shifting it up and down. And to do that, I look at what's being added or subtracted to the equation outside of the parentheses. So I don't look inside the parentheses for the midline equation. I look outside to this -4, right? So the equation of the midline is just y equals this number, -4. Now, I know on some of the quiz questions, the equation could look a little bit different. If I were to just write it, I'll write the same equation over again in a different way. But just to show you it's the same answer. So I know some of the questions on the quiz, instead of having like a plus or minus at the end, there's this, they move it out in front. So this minus or plus is out in front. But the equation for the midline is still the exact same. It's still, you look at what's being added or subtracted outside of the parentheses. So it still would be y equals -4. So even though it looks a little bit different, all of these answers would be the same, whether it's, you're adding or subtracting first or second. So that's, again, really, that's what you do. That's the process. If it was a cos, I forgot the sign there. Oops, sorry. I noticed that. Plus sine 2/3 theta plus 7. All right. So whether it's sine or cosine, you do the same stuff. The amplitude is what's being, forgot the 3. The amplitude is what's being multiplied, right? The period, you take 2 pi divided by what's being multiplied inside the parentheses, right? And then the equation for the midline is y equals what's being added or subtracted outside the parentheses. All right, those are the 3. That's how you do those. All right. You good on that, Bobby? All right, man. I think that's pretty much been an hour. Take a look here. Yeah. All right, guys. If anybody else is watching this or is going to watch it later, for Algebra 1, this is our 8th day. It's really, you're looking through that Module 3, Lesson 9 slides in the quizzes example. Algebra 2, which is I've had a lot of Algebra 2 students ask me questions today. You guys are working on really what we were going to do before we went on break. This break is where we're going to take this quiz on Lesson 7 through 11 on using the unit circle and then manipulating sine and cosine functions. So really this week, if you guys get that quiz done, that's really what you were going to do before break anyway. So that's, if you get your gun early, you can, to do it on Thursday then. General math, I didn't have any general math students, but you guys are working on that cylinders and cones assignment for, really, if you want to do cylinders today and then cones on Thursday, that's a great way to do it. Or you do it all one day as well. I kind of like to put everything out there for the week. I want to start doing that. Like, this is what you got to get done for the week. So it is quote unquote 2 hours of work. It might take you quicker if you get all done in one day. But that's really the plan. All right. So you guys have a good night. Stay healthy. I'll be around my phone and technology the rest of the day. If you have any more questions, I can send you some more personalized videos or examples, whatever you need me to do. Just let me know. You guys stay healthy. Like and subscribe to this video, this YouTube channel.